Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. The rain never truly stops in the deep places, not really. It just slows to a persistent, dripping sigh before gathering its strength again. Here in the quiet of my study, 60 years removed from that place, I can still hear it. The drumming on the tin roof, the incessant patter against the window panes, it's not rain, it's their whispers, always their whispers. My name is Elias Vance. They called me Sergeant back then, not that it mattered much in the end. Ranks and titles crumble like sun-baked earth when the true nature of terror takes hold. I was part of the 101st, though the specific campaign, the names of the fire base, the river, they've blurred, shielded by my mind's own desperate attempts at self-preservation. But the jungle, that emerald hell, alive with a million unseen eyes that I remember with excruciating clarity. We were entrenched at Firebase Chimera, a blister on the face of the jungle, carved out of the dense canopy and red earth. Our mission was vague, as most were: maintain presence, interdict enemy movements, secure supply lines that barely existed. The heat was a living entity, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on you, leeching strength, blurring thought. The air hung thick with humidity, the scent of rot, damp earth, and the metallic tang of fear. My squad was a good one, as good as any. Jackson, my second in command, a quiet man from Alabama with eyes that had seen too much, too young. Miller, the fresh-faced kid from Ohio, barely out of high school, still talked about his sweetheart back home. Doc Jensen, our medic, always had a cynical joke ready, but his hands were steady. And O'Malley, the big man, our heavy gunner, with a laugh that could cut through the jungle din. We were a brotherhood forged in the crucible of distant fire bases, bound by shared hardship and the unspoken promise to watch each other's backs. The conventional enemy, the VC, the NVA, they were a known quantity. They left tracks, they used weapons we recognized, their intentions were clear. There was a grim logic to fighting men. But the jungle itself, it had a different kind of logic, a primal, ancient pulse that made the hair on your arms stand up even on the hottest days. It started subtly, as these things always do, a missing patrol. Not unusual, not in that war, but Private Sanchez and his 3 men didn't disappear in the usual way. No firefight, no booby trap, just gone. Their comms had gone dead with a shriek of static that the radio operator swore sounded like a human scream, stretched and distorted. When we found the site 2 days later, there was no sign of a struggle. No blood, no spent casings. Just 4 rifles laid neatly on the ground, their safeties off. And the stench. A cloying, sickly sweet smell like rotten fruit and ozone. It clung to the air, burrowing into your lungs, making your stomach churn. Command brushed it off. Enemy capture, probably, they said, their voices tinny over the field phones. Or perhaps they wandered off course, jungle rot, but we knew better. Sanchez was a seasoned tracker. He didn't wander, then came the sounds. At night, when the jungle truly came alive, the usual chorus of insects, frogs, and unseen animals would be punctuated by something alien. A click, a hiss, a guttural growl that didn't belong to any known creature. Sometimes it would be a low, mournful hum that resonated in your chest, a sound that carried the weight of ages, the sorrow of a dying world. It twisted the familiar sounds of the night, making them sinister. The wind rustling through the leaves started to sound like whispers. The distant cries of monkeys became distorted, sounding like human wails. Doc Jensen, the ever-pragmatic medic, started handing out extra anxiolytics. Jungle fever, he'd shrug, but I saw the strain around his eyes, the way he'd stare into the darkness beyond the perimeter lights, a half-smoked cigarette forgotten between his fingers. Miller, the kid, began to develop a tick in his eye and would jump at shadows. O'Malley, who usually slept like a felled tree, was spending more and more time polishing his M60, its steel glinting menacingly. I tried to keep morale up, to dismiss the unease as a product of isolation and combat stress. Eyes and ears, fellas, I'd bark during patrols. Stay sharp, it's the gooks playing mind games. But even my own convictions were beginning to fray. The shadows in the jungle seemed deeper, more fluid. The trees themselves appeared to watch us, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers. One night it escalated beyond mere sounds. Private Kowalski, on guard duty by Watchtower Delta, started screaming. Not a scream of pain, but of pure, unadulterated terror. We scrambled, weapons ready, our hearts hammering against our ribs. By the time we reached the tower, he was gone. His rifle was propped against the railing, still warm, and on the floor of the tower, scrawled in what looked like his own blood, was a single, disturbing symbol. A crude, elongated human form, its limbs twisted, its head featureless like a shadow puppet. Jackson knelt, examining the symbol. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, his voice unusually strained. "Kowalski's been under a lot of stress," Doc offered, his voice lacking its usual certainty. Maybe he snapped, but I looked at the symbol, then at the thick, unbroken jungle beyond the tower. No tracks, no signs of forced entry. Just an open tower and a missing man. Kowalski didn't just walk off, he was taken. That night the whispers became clearer. I heard my mother's voice, faint but distinct, calling my name from the tree line. Elias, my boy, what have you done? Then it shifted to the voice of my old drill sergeant, tearing into me for a forgotten infraction. The sounds were all around, swirling, confusing. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my hands against my ears, but they penetrated, burrowing into my brain. I could feel a cold, unseen presence in the bunker, a pressure on my chest. I opened my eyes, scanning the dark corners, but saw nothing, just the flickering lantern light casting dancing shadows. I reached for my rifle, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The next morning the camp was a ghost town. Not literally, but the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Men were jumpy, exhausted, their eyes wide and bloodshot. No one talked about Kowalski or the symbol. It was like a silent agreement to pretend it hadn't happened, to preserve the last shred of sanity. Then came Lieutenant Davies. He was new, fresh out of OCS, and still believed in regulations and proper procedure. He arrived via chopper, oblivious to the pall hanging over Firebase Chimera. He dismissed our reports of strange phenomena as jungle fatigue, malaria-induced hallucinations. "Sergeant Vance," he'd said, puffing out his chest, "I understand conditions are rough, but we need to maintain discipline. Superstitious nonsense has no place in the U.S. Army." He had been in the firebase for less than 24 hours when they made their move. It was just after midnight. A full moon, rare in that season, had broken through the cloud cover, casting an eerie, silver light over the perimeter. I was on my cot, drifting in that half-sleep where the nightmares of the day bled into the dreams of the night. A guttural shriek, impossibly loud and impossibly close, tore through the silence. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something else, a sound that stripped away centuries of evolution, reducing you to a shivering, primordial fear. The alarms blared, then sputtered into silence. The perimeter lights flickered, died, then came back on in erratic flashes, bathing the camp in strobe-like chaos. Rifle fire erupted from Watchtower Gamma, a frantic, desperate spray of bullets into the surrounding darkness. "Contact," Jackson yelled, already on his feet, his M16 ready. Perimeter breach. We scrambled out of the bunker, weapons raised. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and that sickly sweet rot. The jungle, illuminated by the stuttering lights, seemed to pulse. I saw shapes in the tree line, not men. Not animals, tall, impossibly thin figures, moving with a horrifying fluidity that defied physics. They seemed to shimmer, to blend, to be there and not there all at once. Their limbs were too long, their heads small and featureless, like something drawn by a terrified child. They weren't black or green, they seemed to absorb all light, becoming holes in reality. Then I heard it, Lieutenant Davies' voice, clear as day, calling from the dense jungle just beyond the wire. "Sergeant Vance, hold your fire, it's me." "I'm out here." My blood ran cold. Davies was supposed to be in the command bunker, and his voice, it had a strange, resonant quality, an echo that wasn't quite right. "Don't shoot," another voice cried, identical to Miller's. "It's a trick. They're mimicking," but it was too late. Private Johnson, disoriented by the flashing lights and the terrifying spectacle, fired a burst into the jungle towards Davies' voice. A choked gurgle, then silence. "Johnson, you idiot," Jackson roared, but his voice was drowned out by another shriek, closer this time. The creatures weren't just outside the perimeter anymore. They were inside, moving through the camp like wraiths. One of them, glimpsed briefly in a flash of light, moved past Private Gomez's position. Gomez screamed, a high-pitched, childish sound, and then was abruptly silenced. No thud, no struggle, just a sudden, terrifying absence. Fall back to the main bunker," I screamed, my voice hoarse, but no one seemed to hear me. Men were firing wildly, not at specific targets, but at shadows, at sounds, at their own fear. The psychological assault was as potent as the physical one. The whispers intensified, weaving through the gunfire, picking at the edges of our sanity. I heard my grandmother's voice, pleading with me to come home. Then a child's laughter, chillingly innocent, followed by a wet, tearing sound. O'Malley, usually so steady, was a wild man, emptying his M60 into the darkness, his face a mask of primal terror. "Get back, you bastards," he bellowed, tears streaming down his face. "Get back." He stopped suddenly, his eyes widening. He dropped his weapon, clutching his head, his mouth opening in a silent scream. His body convulsed once, twice, then he crumpled, dead before he hit the ground. No visible wound, just gone. Doc Jensen was pulling a syringe from his medic kit, his hands trembling. "Sergeant, they're in my head. They're showing me things," he cried, his eyes glazed over with horror. "My family, they're tearing them apart." He jabbed the needle into his arm, then another, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at me, a flicker of understanding in his eyes, before his body went limp, an empty shell. He had given himself an overdose. Jackson grabbed my arm, his face pale, his eyes frantic. "We have to go, Sergeant." We have to get out of here. We were the only ones left in our immediate vicinity. The main bunker was a scene of utter pandemonium. Rifle fire was sporadic now, punctuated by screams that died abruptly and that sickening hum that permeated everything. The strobe lights continued their erratic dance, creating a hellish disco of death. We moved low and fast through the chaotic camp, trying to reach the back perimeter, the only way out that wasn't directly in the creature's path. The air was thick with the stench of fear, of something acrid like burnt hair. I saw flashes of them in the periphery, tall, thin, moving like distortions in the air. They weren't just killing us, they were breaking us. They wanted to see us shatter. We heard Miller's voice clear and sharp, calling for us from just ahead. "Sergeant Jackson, over here, I found a breach in the wire." Jackson stopped, his eyes fixed on the sound. "Miller," he whispered, relief flooding his face. "No," I hissed, pulling him back. "It's them, that's not Miller." But Jackson, exhausted and terrified, was already moving, drawn by the siren song of a familiar voice, a familiar face. Miller. "Hold on, buddy," I watched in horror as he stumbled into the shadows, calling out to the phantom Miller. There was a sudden, sickening crack, like bones snapping, and a muffled grunt. Then silence, complete and utter silence. The light for a brief moment froze, illuminating a long, gangly limb retracting into the darkness. Jackson was gone. I was alone, utterly, terribly alone. The silence that followed Jackson's disappearance was worse than the screams. It was an oppressive, heavy silence, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the incessant, maddening whispers that seemed to be coming from inside my own skull. "Elias, you left them, you abandoned them. Coward, useless, you deserve this." The voices were mine, then Miller's, then my mother's. They accused, they mocked, they promised unspeakable horrors. My mind felt like it was tearing apart at the seams. I could feel something pressing down on me, a presence so vast and ancient it made my bones ache, my skin crawled. My teeth chattered uncontrollably. I knew with a horrifying certainty that they were playing with me. They didn't want a quick kill. They wanted to strip away everything, every defense, every shred of who I was before they finally took me. I gripped my M16, its cold steel the only anchor in a world that had gone utterly mad. I ran, not towards escape, not towards safety, but away from the whispers, away from the unseen things that clawed at my mind. I crashed through the jungle, heedless of thorns, roots, or hidden dangers. My uniform was torn, my skin shredded. The jungle was a blur of green and shadow, the sounds of my own desperate flight amplified in the terrifying silence. I don't know how long I ran, hours maybe, days perhaps, time lost all meaning. My water ran out, hunger gnawed at my gut, but the terror was a far more potent motivator. Every rustle of leaves, every snapped twig, sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. I kept expecting to feel those long, sinuous limbs wrap around me, to hear that final, guttural shriek in my ear. The creatures followed. I never saw them clearly again, but I felt their presence. The air would grow cold, the whispers would intensify, the very fabric of the jungle around me would seem to warp and twist. They were always just out of sight, always just beyond the edge of perception, like a bad thought that you can't shake. They were hunters, and I was their last, most prized prey. I remember stumbling into a clearing, half dead from exhaustion and fear. A small, muddy stream snaked through it. I fell to my knees, burying my face in the cool water, gulping it down greedily. When I lifted my head, I saw it. A clearing unlike any other. The trees were unnaturally tall, their branches intertwined, forming a dark, oppressive canopy that blocked out the sky. And beneath them, scattered among the ferns and moss, were skeletal remains, not animal. Human, dozens of them. Some were still partially clothed in tattered uniforms, American, Vietnamese, French, Japanese. The bones were bleached white, but arranged in disturbing patterns, like some grotesque art installation. Some were twisted, limbs tied together with vines, heads separated from bodies and placed on stakes. A macabre gallery of terror, and in the center a structure, a crude altar made of piled stones and human skulls. On top of the altar, something pulsed with a soft, black light, a pulsating, amorphous mass that seemed to breathe. It was connected to the skulls by thin, black tendrils that throbbed rhythmically. The smell of ozone and rot was overwhelming here, like standing in a slaughterhouse where sanity itself had been butchered. I realized then, these weren't just monsters. These were collectors. They didn't just kill, they harvested, they studied. They broke minds and then took the pieces. This was their lair, their temple, and I was their newest exhibit, my mind already broken, my spirit already shattered. The whispers intensified, coming from every direction, from the skulls on the altar, from the pulsing mass, from inside my own head. They showed me my squad, their faces contorted in unimaginable agony, their eyes pleading. They showed me my family, tied down, screaming as the shadowy figures moved in. They showed me my own death, slow and excruciating, stretched out over an eternity. I don't know how I broke free from that place. The images, the sounds, the sheer, crushing weight of their presence, it was too much. Something in me snapped. I remember screaming, a primal, guttural roar of defiance and terror. I fired my rifle, emptying the magazine into the pulsing mass, into the skulls, into the shadows that seemed to solidify around me. The bullets did nothing. They passed through the creatures like smoke, but my act of defiance, however futile, seemed to break the spell. I stumbled away, the images branded into my retina, the screams echoing in my ears. I kept running, fueled by an adrenaline that had long since surpassed terror, replaced by a desperate, animalistic will to simply not be there. Eventually, I don't know how, I found myself on the banks of a wide river. And there, like a miracle, was a patrol boat, American. I collapsed on the bank, half in the water, half in the mud, barely conscious, my rifle still clutched in my hand. They pulled me aboard, their faces etched with shock and concern. My debriefing was a joke, I told them everything. The missing patrols, Kowalski's scream, the things in the jungle, the whispers, the slaughter at Firebase Chimera, the altar of bones. They listened with polite, pitying smiles. The doctors diagnosed me with extreme combat stress, jungle psychosis, acute PTSD. They filled me with tranquilizers, sedatives, anything to make me forget. They wanted me to believe it was all in my head. And for a while I went home, got an honorable discharge, took an apartment, got a job, tried to reintegrate, but the jungle had followed me. The whispers are always there. In the hum of the refrigerator, in the static of an old radio, in the rustle of leaves outside my window. I see them in the shifting shadows of my room at night, their tall, gaunt forms, their featureless heads. Sometimes their eyes, or what passes for them, appear in reflections, in the dark glass of the television screen, in the depths of my own haunted gaze. I know they didn't just wipe out my squad, they broke me. They cracked my mind open and planted something there, something that has been growing for 60 years. They are still hunting, still collecting, and I am their greatest triumph, a living testament to their power, a mind forever consumed by their terror. They whisper my name, Elias, my mother's voice, Jackson's, Miller's, Doc's. They call to me from the corners of my study, from the darkness just beyond the reach of the lamp. They remind me of the altar, the pulsing black light, the arrangement of bones. They are waiting. And I know with absolute certainty that one day they will return for the final piece. My mind is already theirs. Soon my body will be too. The rain outside has picked up again. It's not rain, it's their sound, and they're getting closer.